No one could have predicted that a peaceful Sunday morning would erupt into a confrontation. Least of all me. I watched in disbelief as my daughter, Rachel, stood tall, staring down a man with a gun aimed at her head. Rachel, in her worn sneakers, sweat trickling down her face, wore a smirk, like she was deciding whether to laugh or dismantle the man's entire ego. 5 seconds. That's all it took for the neighbors to realize something was wrong. It all started because the neighborhood association thought it would be a good idea to hire someone like Greg Turner, an aspiring security guard who thought he could be our protector. A month ago, we moved to Hawthorne Ridge, a quiet suburban neighborhood with large plots of land and sprawling green lawns. Rachel, a former military trainer, was transitioning into civilian life, jogging the scenic paths and nurturing our vegetable garden. I should have known that peace wouldn't last long. Not with Greg prowling around in his beat-up van with cheap police decals stuck on the sides. I'd been warned early on by Mr. Grayson, an old man who lived next door. Over cups of lukewarm coffee, he'd told me, "Watch out for Greg. Thinks he's a cop. Acts like it, too." I brushed it off as an exaggeration. How wrong I was. On that fateful morning, the sun painted the sky in shades of peach and lavender as Rachel laced up her running shoes and hit the trail. I was on the porch, sipping coffee and planning out my day. 20 minutes later, the screech of tires pierced the air, followed by angry shouting. My coffee splashed as I bolted down the driveway. A crowd had gathered at the trailhead, and there stood Rachel, cool as ice, facing Greg, who was waving a gun around like some kind of bad actor. "Show me your ID," he barked, his voice trembling. "You're trespassing. I'm warning you." Rachel's gaze could have melted steel. "And if I don't?" she asked, her tone mocking. He tightened his grip on the gun, knuckles turning white. The crowd gasped, phones emerged, and my heart raced. But I trusted Rachel. She stepped forward, hands raised slightly, projecting calm. "Are you sure you want to point that at me, Greg?" she asked softly. "You really want to make a mistake you can't undo?" His hand twitched. In an instant, Rachel closed the distance, twisted his wrist, and in one swift move, disassembled the gun into useless parts, which fell to the ground at their feet. The crowd burst into applause, and Greg stood frozen, staring at his broken weapon as if it had betrayed him. Rachel dusted her hands off. "Call your boss," she taunted. "Oh, wait, you don't have one." By the time the sheriff's deputies arrived, shaking Rachel's hand and chuckling at Greg's humiliation, the neighborhood association was less amused. Mrs. Monroe, the president of the HOA, stormed in, perfume trailing behind her like a cloud. She begged Rachel not to press charges to save the reputation of the community. In exchange, she offered a year's worth of free dues. Rachel smiled politely and said she'd think about it. But I could see it in her eyes. She wasn't done yet. Rachel wasn't the type to rush into things. She was a planner, a strategist. After disarming Greg, she finished her jog, tossing me a grin as she passed by. "We're going to have some fun with this," she said, and I didn't need to ask for details. I'd seen that look in her eyes before during her time in the military. She wasn't just going to let this go. For days, Rachel kept it cool, jogging, chatting with neighbors, gathering intel. She asked all the right questions. How long had Greg been patrolling? Who was funding him? How were fines issued? She learned that Greg wasn't a volunteer at all. He was a shady hire, paid from the HOA dues with no background check and no real authority, just a fake badge and a bloated ego. Rachel wanted hard evidence. One night, we snuck out, planting hidden cameras around the neighborhood, by the trail, the HOA office, and even the community clubhouse. The adrenaline was electric, like we were in a covert mission. Soon, the footage began rolling in. We caught Greg bullying a teenager on a bike, accusing him of endangering the community. He'd also intimidated a mother for decorating her front lawn with balloons, threatening to fine her $500 if she didn't get a permit. The footage made my blood boil, but Rachel was all business. "This is perfect," she said as she saved the files to her laptop. Next, she turned her attention to the HOA. Posing as a new, enthusiastic neighbor, she charmed her way into a meeting. Over stale coffee and dry donuts, the board spilled their secrets. The dues were being funneled into Greg's patrol funds via a so-called beautification budget, covering his gas, uniform, and even his fake badge. One night, Rachel recorded Mrs. Monroe secretly plotting to drown us in violations until we gave up and moved. They called Rachel a troublemaker and me a pushover. Rachel had just smiled. They don't know who they're messing with, she said later. Rachel wasn't only after Greg. She wanted to expose the entire corrupt HOA, all the neighbors who'd been silenced by fear. She built her case like an impenetrable fortress. Videos, photos, and a detailed flowchart that traced the dues straight to Greg's pockets. Meanwhile, Greg, thinking he'd intimidated her, cruised past our house with a smug smirk, completely unaware of the trap Rachel had set. Rachel took her time, letting the HOA dig their own hole. "We need to bait them," she said. "Let them think they're untouchable. They'll show their true colors." It was risky, but it was genius. We played along, paying the dues, even baking cookies for the next HOA meeting. Mrs. Monroe squirmed. Then the retaliation came fast, a violation notice accusing us of displaying an unauthorized flag. Then came more notices, complaints about Rachel jogging too much and the height of our grass, despite our yard being pristine. Rachel documented everything. Her evidence pile grew taller by the day. The escalation came when Rachel's car was keyed and her tires were slashed with a fake ticket accusing her of reckless driving. She didn't rage. She smiled. We checked the driveway camera, and there was Greg, knife in hand, his smug face illuminated by the security light. "Got him," Rachel said, freezing the footage on the screen. Rachel drafted a detailed report, attaching all the evidence, and sent it to the sheriff, news stations, and even the district attorney. But she wasn't just aiming for a legal victory. She wanted public humiliation. To make sure the HOA couldn't escape the fallout, she organized a community event to honor local veterans, including her own service. The HOA had no choice but to support the event or risk looking unpatriotic. They promoted it, but they had no idea what they were setting themselves up for. The day of the event arrived. The tents were set up, the buffet ready, and red, white, and blue decorations everywhere. News vans rolled in, reporters ready with cameras and notepads. The neighbors were buzzing, some of them quietly supporting Rachel's cause. The HOA board showed up, Mrs. Monroe smiled tight, but fake, and Greg was nowhere to be found. Rachel delivered a heartfelt speech, thanking the veterans, then handed the microphone to the reporters. They grilled the HOA, playing footage of Mrs. Monroe's secret scheming and Greg's bullying. Neighbors gasped, whispers turning into anger. The HOA crumbled. Mrs. Monroe's apologies were drowned out by boos. As deputies arrived, they handed out investigation notices, even thanking Rachel. The HOA's facade crumbled as neighbors demanded resignations. Headlines exposed Greg's fake authority and the board's corruption. Petitions forced Mrs. Monroe and 4 others out, replaced by honest residents. An audit shut down illegal patrols. Monroe quietly moved away. Hawthorne Ridge came alive again. Kids playing, flags waving, fear gone. At a cookout, Mr. Miller praised Rachel's courage. Later, she said, "Fighting's about not quitting." A month later, the park unveiled a plaque. "A community thrives when its people stand together." Rachel smiled, planting sunflowers as her quiet victory.